Hello there. Today's single malt review is looking at an old favourite on a global scale, Glenmorangie Original 10-year-old.
Yes, indeed. One of the really long-standing 10-year-olds. I thought it was about time we took a look at it. So Glenmorangie, one of the real famous Highlands, as it states on the bottle, and the 10-year-old has been around for ages. I can't imagine a time when it wasn't around, so it's a really old standby. And traditionally, you'd say bottled, 40% coloured chill filtered. So never mind, we won't fault it too much for that, because despite, I think this is a pretty good whisky on its own merits. So produced, as it says, by the 16 men of Tyne, which amounts to the people who work in the distillery. So 16 men of Tyne, reviewed by the 2 men of Craycroft. We'll see how it stands up to our scrutiny.
Maturation seems to be exclusively first and second fill bourbon casks.
And it's, if you hadn't told me, I would have thought they'd maybe blended in a little bit of sherry, because despite being a fairly simple whisky, it's not without its subtleties, not without its nuance, as I think we will find out. So without further ado, we shall have a look at the nose, which I think is tremendously fruity.
It is very floral and fruity, even by a Highland whisky standard.
It's almost coming in a Speyside direction for me, rather than a Highland. It is very fresh fruity. I get the apples and pears of Speyside are there, but possibly in a sort of a redder, riper spectrum than you would expect for Speyside.
There's some florals, like some citrus blossom. Even jasmine. There's
a lot of a floral character there. I suppose that's where its Highland lineage really makes itself known. But there is a lot of citrus blossom, orange blossom, I get. It's always been a bit of a funny thing. Glenmorangie always brings to mind oranges. And there may be a slight sort of synesthetic effect there, because it's always reminded me of oranges. The smell has orange blossom, and you'll have to see if you agree or not, but I get tremendous orange on the palate as well, for not just this, but a great many Glenmorangies. So it could just be my mind convincing itself of things, which happens all too often, especially when you're tasting subtle things like malt whisky. But I really think it's a thing. I think there is real oranges in Glenmorangie, but we shall have to find out. As for other things, there is a little honey there, but it's not. It's a very fresh nose, very youthful, without being harsh. Lively, vibrant nose. It's very fresh and fruity with fresh flowers. Not a lot of stickiness. Not overly sweet. Not overly oaked.
Like I say, it's quite a complex nose for a pure bourbon maturation.
And that sort of continues. And the palate, it's very fresh, very fruity, and the flavours are such that I think there's actually quite a lot of older whisky in here. I think this has been quite generously top-dressed to make it what it is, because it just tastes more rounded than another 10-year-old might. 10-year-old whisky, bourbon matured, some of it in second fill as well. I would expect quite a lot of spirituous character coming out of this, and though youthful, though fresh, the character isn't very spirity. It's not very fainty. There's not a great deal of acetone or hydrocarbon quality coming out of this. It's very fresh and very ripe fruit.
I'm getting a lot of big sweet flavours, a lot of caramel and sort of honey roasted nuts. Even a bit of fruit, maybe some pears and apples, some honey drizzled orange.
So you think there's a little bit of orange in there?
Yeah.
As well? I think it more comes into it when you have a bit more genuine sherry maturation in there, especially in some of the older, even just 12 years old examples. It gets more orangey as it goes on, but I think it's still very present.
There's a little vanilla and some very light spice, but otherwise not a whole lot of things that I would immediately pick as being bourbon signifiers.
And so we're finding really quite a lot in here, and I wouldn't want to give the impression that it's a hugely cerebral whisky. There is a lot in here, but if you can visualise it as I do, all the flavours are sort of up on the top. It's a whisky with quite a lot of breadth, but not huge quantities of depth. It has maybe the breadth of the 16-year-old whisky that it kind of hints at, but those flavours don't go down a very long way. They are quite primary and they're quite individual. So that's probably as best as I can describe it, really. But I think as the 10-year-old whisky that it is, you're getting an awful lot of character out of those 10 years old.
It's a pleasantly full flavour for something bottled at only 40%. It is a rarer, and by today's standards, lower strength. So sometimes you can get whiskies that are tasting just a little bit watery, a little bit insipid at that strength. But this one, no, it's stood up well. It's still drinkable, fresh, and doesn't leave your palate wanting for flavour.
I think this is an excellent whisky at 10 years old, and I think it's Glenmorangie is maybe a very fortunate distillery in that they can produce a 10-year-old there which is ready at 10 years old. Many distilleries they'll come good at a certain age, and that age can sort of vary around. At Clynelish, you rarely see it under 14 years old, because that's when Clynelish is deemed to be ready, or at least as far as the I think perfectly good classic malts range would deem it. Similarly, Craig and Moore, 12 years old. Most things 12 years old. Glenmorangie is 100% ready to drink at 10 years old, and this is really proof of that. And it's also perfectly enjoyable at its 40% with this colouring and chilled filtration. It's obviously quite a robust whisky if it can have all those sort of knocks against it, or what would normally be knocks against it, and still come out so strong. So maybe a lucky whisky to be this good at 10 years old, but nonetheless a very, very strong one.
I've added the tiniest splash of water to mine, and that's really made quite a difference. It has brought out some of those harsher notes, some of the acetone. There's even a little bit of a prickle across the lips and tongue. It's sort of like it's enhanced the essence, really, of the alcohol or the other sharper characters. Obviously it's diluted, it's weaker, there isn't actually any more of anything in there, but it's really transformed and enhanced some of those sharper notes.
And another, I guess you'd call it a strength of this particular Glenmorangie, is that it is everywhere. It has an enormous penetration in the market worldwide. It's been a very long time, 13 years or so, the statistics we've had a look at tell us, being the best-selling single malt in Scotland, which, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, is a tiny, tiny market. Scotland certainly does not drink not nearly as much malt whisky as it produces. Most of that goes elsewhere. So in terms of sales, that doesn't mean a great deal, but it means something. It's subsequently been knocked off in 2010 by Glenfiddich, which I think is just slightly sad, because if I compared this to a Glenfiddich 12, which we're not doing, so this is purely opinion off the top of my head, I think this has way, way more going on for ostensibly quite similarly matured whiskies. Only this one 2 years younger, so who knows?
We're just going to see who is actually the most popular whisky in Scotland and in the world these days.
I think Glenfiddich would be a good place to start, always a usual suspect to those guys, but who knows, maybe an investigation for another time.
I think I preferred this without the addition of water. It is a much more sweet and fruity flavour, which won't work for everyone. It works for me, certainly.
I think it probably didn't really need the water, as most 40% whiskies do not, but it hasn't suffered. It hasn't suffered too much. It's just maybe gone just a little thinner than it was really built for. But anyway, without going further down the Glenmorangie hole on this one, with such a simple whisky, we should assign it some scores, and mine's going to be a fairly high score for not a budget price, certainly. In fact, it's for 10 years old, it's quite expensive as whiskies go. This one gets an 86 from me. It's really good, solid stuff. What do you think?
A little lower. It's a 78 for me. It's a sweet and satisfying, youthful but still full-flavoured 10-year-old bourbon matured whisky. It's a good Highland whisky. It's a good bourbon whisky. It's very heavy on the sweet and fruity, though. Very nice, very refreshing, sort of a summer whisky, if there ever was one. So we should drink it in the next month or two before things start to get cool around here, and we all have to start drinking peated sherries or port finishes or other sort of Dave favourites around here. But anyway, this was Glenmorangie, 10 years old. Easy recommendation there, and also a good one to have when you're sort of out, because
Like I say, the penetration on this one is huge in terms of global and in premises as well. So you can usually find it on the whisky list for usually not a huge amount of money, and it's a really good, solid one to go for. So there you go. Easily a bit more interesting than your Glenfiddich 12, in my opinion. But anyway, Sludger, we will have something coming right up.